Hey guys, tonight we journey back to the wintry chaos of 1066, when the air in London smelled like wood smoke and nervous ambition, and a man named William from Normandy, who barely spoke a word of English, was about to crown himself king of a country that hadn't exactly invited him. You're standing in the thick of it, surrounded by clanking armor, Latin prayers, and confused Saxon nobles trying not to make eye contact. William, the newly victorious Duke of Normandy, is about to be crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey, which sounds ceremonial and majestic until you hear the screaming. Not his screaming. The crowds. See, during the coronation, some Norman guards outside the abbey thought they heard a riot beginning when the crowd inside cheered in English. Naturally, they did the logical thing. They burned a few houses down to maintain order, because nothing says peaceful transition of power like accidentally torching part of the city. You shift uncomfortably in your chainmail boots, wondering whether this is a normal part of English political theater. Spoiler: it isn't. But it does set the tone for what's about to come. William stands tall, very tall, by the way, over 6 feet, which is practically NBA level for the 11th century, and looks every inch the Conqueror in his ornate robes and too heavy crown. You suspect he might be regretting some design choices. It's a bit tight around the temples, and he has that squinty expression of a man wondering if anyone will dare point it out. He's a conqueror. Yes, but already you sense that he's more administrator than romantic warrior. William wasn't here just to swing a sword and ride dramatically into sunsets. No. He had spreadsheets in his soul. He wants order, taxation, loyalty, and most importantly, a well-behaved nobility. Unfortunately, England has a habit of chewing up conquerors and spitting them back out with slightly singed tunics. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere especially sleepy like rural Norway or the middle of Nebraska, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's oddly fun to see where we're all drifting off from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge out of London, stepping over ash-covered cobbles and the occasional roast goose someone forgot during the whole fire situation. William's crown ceremony is complete, but there's a problem, many actually. England isn't one tidy kingdom. It's a patchwork of stubborn regions, each with its own moody lords, cultural quirks, and regional breakfasts. The south, where William has stomped around with relative eases, now full of castles and oaths. But the north? That's a different beast. It's colder, poorer, more rebellious, and very much not interested in William's spreadsheet dreams. The Anglo-Danish nobility of Northumbria, in particular, isn't thrilled about this whole foreign overlord with sharp cheekbones situation. Many of them still see Edgar Atheling, the teenage royal heir and possibly the most reluctant political symbol in history, as the rightful king. He's somewhere out there, maybe hiding in a monastery or playing dice with rebels near the River Tyne. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive this England. Not just because of the swords, though there are plenty of those. It's the winter colds without penicillin, the boiled turnips pretending to be a meal, and the constant, nagging risk of catching dysentery from a bucket someone used for soup and something else. Life expectancy? Not ideal. Back to William Hayes' planning, plotting, trying to Normanify the North, though that's not a word yet. He sends letters, bribes, nobles, even tries to appoint local lords with Norman loyalty. But every time he thinks he has a toehold, something slippery happens. A rebellion bubbles up in the countryside. A noble changes sides. Or someone accidentally lets Edgar escape again, which seems to happen like weekly. Historians still argue whether William truly underestimated the North, or whether he simply lacked the manpower to manage such a fragmented kingdom. But what's clear is this: the coronation may have placed a crown on his head, but it didn't earn him the trust or fear of the North. As you ride alongside William's retinue northward, you feel the dampness creeping in. The roads worsen. The welcome gets colder. You pass stone churches and Saxon villages with wary eyes behind shutters. These people haven't accepted William. They're just waiting quietly, stubbornly for their moment. You reach York. It's a city with bones Roman walls, Viking ghosts, and a long memory. William tries. Diplomacy. Then force. Neither seems to work. The North simply pauses. Wait. It's the kind of defiance that doesn't need banners or open battles. Just a lot of shrugs, silences, and inconveniently timed uprisings. And here's your first quirky tidbit. One of William's early attempts to calm things involved lavish giving, including land grants and honorary titles to local nobles, but the northern lords were deeply unimpressed. One even reportedly told a messenger, "Gold doesn't warm the bones when the king forgets your name." Sleepy burn. So William retreats to regroup. More castles will be needed. More oaths. And probably more fires. You stare into the cold northern sky. This is only the beginning. You wake up stiff in the saddle, the smell of last night's campfire clinging to your cloak. It's still dark, which makes sense this far north. The sun doesn't rush into the sky, and neither, apparently, do the locals rush to welcome their new king. You're traveling deeper into England's wild northern stretch. The roads are barely roads, now just dirt paths chewed by hooves and weather. Every few miles you pass a village, but no one comes out. No market chatter. No children playing in the lanes, just shuttered windows and smoke rising silently from thatched roofs. You imagine they're inside muttering about Normans, stirring thick porridge with grim expressions. William has sent messages ahead, trying to project a bit of Norman calm. Fancy proclamations with seals, urging loyalty, promising protection, those sorts of things. But up here, letters don't mean much. The northern lords, especially those in Northumbria, are, shall we say, unimpressed. You feel it in the air. A careful, quiet contempt. Like being politely ignored at a dinner party where everyone knows you weren't actually invited. The issue, of course, is that the North doesn't really feel English to William. It has deep Anglo-Danish roots. Many of the families here trace their bloodlines not to Wessex or Mercia, but to Norse men, those lovely axe-wielding fellows who popped over during the Viking Age and liked it so much they stayed. As a result, their loyalties are tangled. They don't see William as a rightful king. They see him as a southern problem. You arrive in Durham, where the bishop has barely scraped together a welcome committee. A few monks, some cold bread, and that one guy who insists on calling William the other herald. You glance at William's face. He does not enjoy being called the other anything. Despite the chilly reception, William tries diplomacy again. He appoints Copsey, a Northumbrian noble who once served under Tostig, Harold's brother, to act as earl in the region. Seems like a reasonable move. Local man, local loyalty. What could go wrong? Everything, basically. Copsey is murdered in less than a month. Chased into a church by another noble named Osulf, and killed at the altar. Not exactly the vibe William was going for. You and the rest of William's entourage find this discouraging. And cold, always cold. The weather seems to reflect the mood. Damp. Brooding. Slightly murderous. So William tries again. He sends in a Norman noble, Robert de Comines, with 700 troops. Surely that'll do the trick. Spoiler. It does not. Robert is ambushed in Durham and burned alive in the bishop's house. A bit rude, really. Historians still argue whether this period, roughly 1067 to 1069, Was a miscalculation on William's part, or simply inevitable resistance? Did he fail to understand how fiercely independent the North was? Or did he just move too slowly, underestimating how fast rebellion brews when you combine old loyalties, foreign rule, and really uncomfortable weather? From your perspective, it just feels like a very long camping trip with increasingly aggressive neighbors. You settle near York, a city that's about to become very important and very unlucky. William knows he must control it. It's a northern hub trade routes, defenses, politics. But the people there are just as slippery. They smile at envoys, nod at soldiers, and then quietly send messages to Edgar Atheling. Ah yes, Edgar. The teenage not king, who somehow manages to be everywhere and nowhere at once. A living banner for rebellion. His supporters pop up in Lincoln, in Durham, in the Pennines. Wherever the Normans build a watchtower, someone scribbles "Edgar lives" into a nearby tree. You're starting to feel like you're chasing smoke. And then comes the kicker. In 1069, the North finally erupts, full-scale rebellion. Edgar himself sails in with support from the Danes, because of course the Danes are here again. You stand on the wall of York and watch as the city falls into chaos. Norman garrisons are overwhelmed. 2 of William's newly built castles are destroyed. The northern rebels are not just muttering anymore, they are roaring. William, to his credit, doesn't panic. But you can tell he's irritated in that very specific way only a Norman can be. Silently fuming while brushing non-existent dust off his tunic, he gathers an army. A real army. He's done being polite. But you? You're wondering how much further north this road goes and how many more times you'll sleep in wet socks. Your quirky tidbit for the night. Some rebellious nobles used coded messages hidden in loaves of bread to communicate across villages. Just imagine biting into a baguette and finding a tiny scroll that says, "Edgar says hello." Trust was in short supply. Even bread was suspicious. Now, as William prepares to head north again, this time with fire in his heart and a torch in every hand, you realize something unsettling. This isn't going to be a campaign, it's going to be a reckoning. And the North, stoic as ever, is waiting for him. You ride beside William again, and this time there's no diplomatic parchment in sight, just iron-tipped spears, carts stacked with supplies, and the kind of silence that hums like a storm brewing behind your ears. The rebellion in the North has finally pushed William beyond the tipping point, and now you're part of an army marching with grim purpose through muddy English roads, bound once more for the ever-defiant city of York. Rebellions, you've noticed, are never especially convenient. But these ones? They're downright frequent. The North seems to operate on a rotation every few weeks. A new pocket of resistance flares up. Just when one earl pledges loyalty, another is setting a Norman tax collector's house on fire. If rebellion were a seasonal sport, the Northumbrians would have a championship team. William is done playing the slow game. No more replacements for murdered earls. No more pardons. He's going to drag order into the North, kicking and screaming if necessary, and you, lucky you, are along for the ride. The king's strategy is now about overkill. Rebellions crop up, crush them harder than the last one. Villages harboring rebels, level them. Grain stores, burn them. Livestock, take them or eliminate them. It's not subtle, but it is efficient. You arrive at York, and what's left of the city makes your stomach drop. Blackened beams jut out of charred earth where buildings once stood. One of the Norman Caselsa proud wooden fort, meant to symbolize dominances in ruins, trampled and torched by rebels during the last uprising. The Danes have retreated for now, but the chaos they left behind simmers like a stew that's been left on the fire too long. William sets to rebuilding. Again. He orders 2 new Motte and Bailey castles constructed. You watch as timber is hauled, trenches dug, and a new palisade rises. The king doesn't just want to win back control, he wants it to stick this time. You admire the effort, but you also notice that behind every hammering of nails, there's a beat of tension. The city isn't safe. The surrounding countryside is still full of people who'd rather see William's head on a pike than his banner on their walls. Historians still argue whether William's repeated reconstructions of York were acts of stubborn idealism or necessary military strategy. Was he trying to show dominance through resilience, or was he simply stuck in a pattern of whack-a-mole, rebuilding what his enemies would inevitably burn again? Either way, you're starting to recognize the cycle: build, burn, rebuild, sleep somewhere drafty. Repeat. Some of your fellow Norman soldiers are beginning to look around with that weary expression you've seen on farmers before a hailstorm. A mixture of dread and inevitability. They know what's coming next. Another rebellion. Probably another arrow in someone's back. And certainly another month without proper plumbing. But here's your fun historical tidbit. During the quieter moments, soldiers amuse themselves by carving small games into flat stones. You find an early version of Nine Men's Morris, played with pebbles and bits of broken pottery. In the middle of scorched earth, humans still find ways to play, even as rebellions rage. And then surprise, a fresh uprising erupts. This time, in the west, near the River Aire. It's not even been a full season since the last one. The North seems determined to exhaust William's patience, if not his entire supply chain. You and the others groan, remount your horses, and ride once more into the damp unknown. Back in London, things are supposedly stable. But out here, loyalty is a fleeting thing. William knows that unless he breaks the North's ability to rebel permanently, it'll keep slipping through his fingers. That's when you hear rumors, plans muttered over campfires, discussed in Latin behind sealed doors. William's preparing something different this time. Something darker. Something final. But you're not there yet. You still have a few more miles to cover, more rivers to ford, and at least 2 more nights in a tent that leaks even when it isn't raining. As you ride through yet another half-abandoned village, you begin to recognize the look in the eyes of the people who remain. It's not fear. Not quite. It's a kind of patient hatred, the kind that waits for kings to grow old and for empires to forget. You shiver, not entirely from the cold. You ride beside William again, and this time there's no diplomatic parchment in sight, just iron-tipped spears, carts stacked with supplies, and the kind of silence that hums like a storm brewing behind your ears. The rebellion in the North has finally pushed William beyond the tipping point, and now you're part of an army marching with grim purpose through muddy English roads, bound once more for the ever-defiant city of York. Rebellions, you've noticed, are never especially convenient. But these ones, they're downright frequent. The North seems to operate on a rotation every few weeks. A new pocket of resistance flares up. Just when one earl pledges loyalty, another is setting a Norman tax collector's house on fire. If rebellion were a seasonal sport, the Northumbrians would have a championship team. William is done playing the slow game. No more replacements for murdered earls. No more pardons. He's going to drag order into the North, kicking and screaming if necessary, and you, lucky you, are along for the ride. The king's strategy is now about overkill. Rebellions crop up, crush them harder than the last one. Villages harboring rebels, level them. Grain stores, burn them. Livestock, take them or eliminate them. It's not subtle, but it is efficient. You arrive at York, and what's left of the city makes your stomach drop. Blackened beams jut out of charred earth where buildings once stood. One of the Norman Caselsa proud wooden fort, meant to symbolize dominance, lies in ruins, trampled and torched by rebels during the last uprising. The Danes have retreated for now, but the chaos they left behind simmers like a stew that's been left on the fire too long. William sets to rebuilding. Again. He orders 2 new Motte and Bailey castles constructed. You watch as timber is hauled, trenches dug, and a new palisade rises. The king doesn't just want to win back control, he wants it to stick this time. You admire the effort, but you also notice that behind every hammering of nails, there's a beat of tension. The city isn't safe. The surrounding countryside is still full of people who'd rather see William's head on a pike than his banner on their walls. Historians still argue whether William's repeated reconstructions of York were acts of stubborn idealism or necessary military strategy. Was he trying to show dominance through resilience, or was he simply stuck in a pattern of whack-a-mole, rebuilding what his enemies would inevitably burn again? Either way, you're starting to recognize the cycle: build, burn, rebuild, sleep somewhere drafty. Repeat. Some of your fellow Norman soldiers are beginning to look around with that weary expression you've seen on farmers before a hailstorm. A mixture of dread and inevitability. They know what's coming next. Another rebellion. Probably another arrow in someone's back. And certainly another month without proper plumbing. But here's your fun historical tidbit. During the quieter moments, soldiers amuse themselves by carving small games into flat stones. You find an early version of 9 Men's Morris, played with pebbles and bits of broken pottery. In the middle of scorched earth, humans still find ways to play, even as rebellions rage. And then surprise, a fresh uprising erupts. This time, in the west, near the River Aire. It's not even been a full season since the last one. The North seems determined to exhaust William's patience, if not his entire supply chain. You and the others groan, remount your horses, and ride once more into the damp unknown. Back in London, things are supposedly stable. But out here, loyalty is a fleeting thing. William knows that unless he breaks the North's ability to rebel permanently, it'll keep slipping through his fingers. That's when you hear rumors, plans muttered over campfires, discussed in Latin behind sealed doors. William's preparing something different this time. Something darker. Something final. But you're not there yet. You still have a few more miles to cover, more rivers to ford, and at least 2 more nights in a tent that leaks even when it isn't raining. As you ride through yet another half-abandoned village, you begin to recognize the look in the eyes of the people who remain. It's not fear. Not quite. It's a kind of patient hatred, the kind that waits for kings to grow old and for empires to forget. You shiver, not entirely from the cold. You're ankle-deep in Yorkshire mud now, and the only thing colder than the wind is the welcome. William's solution to this endless game of rebellion and retaliation is as architectural as it is authoritarian. He's going to build castles, lots of castles. Enough that even the sheep begin to look over their woolly shoulders at the sound of hammering. Today you help unpack timber near the River Ouse. The site is soggy and smells like damp bread, moldy hay, and ambition. It's another Motte and Bailey design, quick to erect, mildly impressive from a distance, and usually filled with soldiers who smell like they haven't washed since Hastings. These forts are more than military structures. They're messages. Big wooden "stay put" signs to the local population, who interpret them more as, "Try burning this one down next." Each castle comes with a garrison of Norman knights who don't speak the local language, don't understand local customs, and think boiled turnips count as seasoning. You can see how this might lead to some tension. You try to smile at a passing farmer. He spits in the mud without breaking eye contact. This particular castle's tower keeps collapsing. The locals claim the earth is cursed. The Norman engineer claims the workers are lazy. The truth probably lies somewhere between too much rain and not enough nails. Either way, your boots are slowly dissolving. and someone just burned the last pot of porridge. Historians still debate whether these hastily built castles had the intended effect. Were they symbols of Norman strength, or targets inviting rebellion? Some argue they were vital to William's hold on the region. Others suggest they simply drew more attention to how unwelcome his rule was. All you know is that every time one goes up, something nearby goes down, usually in flames. You spend your nights inside these half-finished forts, trying to ignore the wind that whistles through every crack. It's a mournful sort of sound, like a ghost politely reminding you that you're trespassing. One night, a soldier swears he saw a spirit on the stair-san old Saxon warrior, still in armor, shaking his head in disappointment. No one's sure whether it was a ghost or just Reginald from the kitchen after too much cider. But despite the spirits, the real threat is flesh and blood. One evening, a fire breaks out near the stables. Sabotage. Someone slipped in during the night and lit a torch to the hay. You and a handful of others scramble to douse it before it spreads. When morning comes, a trail of footprints leads to the edge of the woods, then disappears. The rebels aren't gone. They're watching, waiting. One of the captains decides to make an example. He drags a suspected local collaborator into the center of camp and forces him to dig ditches all day. The man says nothing, just works in silence. Every strike of the spade, a quiet act of defiance. You wonder what keeps him going. Pride? Spite? The faint hope that someday this will all be over? Here's your quirky tidbit. To maintain morale, Norman officers sometimes brought musicians along, fiddlers, flutists, and even a very out-of-place harpist who once tried to perform a love ballad in the middle of a siege. The soldiers threw stale bread at him, but only gently. It's war, but not without manners. Still, the tension thickens. You notice the soldiers checking their weapons more often. Eyes linger too long on shadows. A simple cough makes everyone flinch. Word spreads that another rebellion may be brewing in the hills. The castles aren't stopping them. They're just slowing them down. One night, you overhear a conversation between two knights. One says, "William might have to do something drastic soon." The other just nods. Says he's heard whispers about a plan, a harrying, whatever that means. You lie awake long after, staring at the wooden beams above, counting knots in the timber to keep your nerves steady. Outside, an owl hoots, then silence. You begin to wonder whether this is how history feels when it's not written yet, just cold, wet, and full of uncertainty. The kind of story no bard bothers to rhyme because it's too quiet, too slow, too full of failure. But you're still here, still building, still hoping the mud dries before winter comes. You're barely 2 miles from the river Humber when the whispers become declarations. The Danes are coming. Again. Honestly, at this point, it's starting to feel like they never left. These aren't the mighty raiders of old with dragon-headed ships and horned helmets, which, by the way, were never historically accurate tertiary to ruin that. No, these are leaner, smarter Danes with political ambition and a knack for arriving precisely when William least wants them. You peer out from a hillside lookout. Below, in the marshy haze, longships cut through the mist like dark needles, sowing discontent into the land. They glide up the river without fanfarino shouting, no battle cries, just the creak of oars and the soft slap of water. They're not here for glory, they're here for leverage. It's the autumn of 1069, and you're back in York, once again surrounded by smoke. But this time, it's not from your own campfires, it's from the city itself, burning again. The rebels opened the gates to the Danes, and together they sacked the city with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for harvest festivals and chicken stew night. You can smell it before you see it. Scorched grain, charred wood, and something more bitter the acrid scent of another Norman loss. The garrisons William left behind didn't stand a chance. Two castles, painstakingly rebuilt only months earlier, are now rubble and ash. You're camped outside the smoldering ruins, staring across the river at a city that keeps slipping through your king's fingers like sand. William is still days away, mustering forces farther south. You, meanwhile, are stuck on guard duty, swatting midges and watching the Danes pitch tents in your half-built fort like they own the place. Historians still argue whether the Danish arrival was a serious threat or more of a symbolic show of power. Some believe their main goal was to rattle William and destabilize his regime. Others suggest it was a half-hearted attempt to reclaim influence in England. What's clear to you, on this side of the water, is that they're very comfortable here. The rebels' local Saxons and Anglo-Danes treat the Danes like old drinking buddies. They toast Edgar Etheling by firelight, clinking mugs and sharpening blades, full of optimism that this time the tide will turn. And you? You start to wonder what Edgar's really like. Is he brave, clever, or just really good at showing up after the heavy lifting's done? Your quirky tidbit of the night. A few rebels supposedly gifted the Danes barrels of mead with messages hidden inside the cork-coated instructions for synchronized attacks across Yorkshire. One overly enthusiastic courier drank the entire barrel before delivering the message. The plan went off late, but the party was, reportedly, a great success. Back in camp, you hear a Norman knight muttering, "We should salt the earth and be done with it." He doesn't mean it, probably. But the frustration is real. This isn't just a war. It's a war with bad weather, worse roads, and enemies who always seem to know the terrain better than you do. William arrives by mid-October, and the air changes. His army is larger than before, his expression tighter. You're not sure whether he's angry, tired, or simply allergic to northern wind. Either way, he doesn't hesitate. He meets with the Danish leaders, offers them gold and safe passage, and just like that they're gone again, leaving the rebels to face the storm alone. It's a political masterstroke, bribery wrapped in diplomacy with a side of, "Please leave." But it also sends a message. William won't be chasing rebels around in circles anymore. He's preparing something worse. You can feel it in the way he looks at the countryside now, not with conquest in his eyes, but with calculation. The people of the north may have welcomed the Danes, but now they're on their own, and winter is coming. That night, you share a blanket with a fellow soldier and try to sleep. Somewhere in the dark, an owl hoots. Someone's boiling beans nearby. Someone else is sharpening a blade. The fire crackles. A breeze tugs gently at your tent flap. It's too quiet. You wake with a start to the sound of distant bells, monastery bells, ringing a warning. The Danes may be gone, but rebellion is not. And William is no longer in the mood to rebuild. He's coming north with everything he has. And this time, he's not planning to leave it standing. The morning frost is thick enough to crunch underfoot as you step out of your tent. Every breath steams in the cold air. The wind bites through your cloak like it knows you've only got one layer of wool left between you and hypothermia. Around you, the camp stirs slowly. The horses snort. Fires are coaxed back to life. Everyone's moving stiffly, not from sleep, but from knowing what's ahead. The army is headed deeper into rebel territory. But today, you're not marching with the main column. Instead, you've been reassigned to escort one very specific, very inconvenient teenager, Edgar Etheling. Yes, that Edgar. The 15-year-old whose name has been on every rebel banner, whispered in every tavern, scribbled in every threatening note, passed between conspirators like it's a limited edition trading card. He's been crowned, unofficially, exiled, repeatedly, captured, several times. And now for the Momenthes Williams prisoner. And he looks entirely underwhelming. You expected a fearsome warrior, or at least a charismatic rebel prince. But no, Edgar is skinny, cold, and more interested in the state of his boots than the fate of the kingdom. He has the bored energy of someone who's been dragged to far too many royal councils and never gets to sit near the snacks. You escort him through the frost-covered woods, and he occasionally asks awkward questions like, "Do you think the North will ever stop hating us?" And, "What do you call a frozen turnip?" You suspect he's been under house arrest too long. Cabin fever. Meet winter rebellion. But this strange teenager represents a real problem. William doesn't want to execute Edgar that could turn him into a martyr. But he can't just let him go, either. So instead, Edgar becomes a kind of political football, kicked around by alliances and negotiations. Some say he was offered safe exile. Others think he was deliberately shuffled from court to court to keep him from becoming too powerful. Historians still argue whether Edgar ever truly wanted to rule, or if he was just the most convenient symbol of Anglo-Saxon resistance left standing. Certainly the rebels treated him more like a banner than a leader. And now, walking beside him in the freezing woods, you get the sense that even Edgar isn't entirely sure what he's supposed to be. You camp for the night in a ruined manor that once belonged to one of Edgar's distant relatives. The roof is gone. The hearth is cracked. But the foundations remain like everything else in the north, broken but not quite erased. As the fire crackles, Edgar tells you about his early years. How he was born in Hungary while his father was in exile. How he returned to England as a child after Edward the Confessor's death. How he never really felt at home in any one place. You listen, because honestly, what else is there to do? The stars are out, the wind is howling, and you've already counted the holes in your socks twice. Here's your quirky tidbit for the night. Edgar apparently once escaped Norman capture by disguising himself as a fisherman and hiding in a boat filled with stinky herring. If true, it would make him the only teenage royal in history to win a stealth mission using seafood. At dawn, you rejoin the main army. Edgar is handed off to another group, bound for a monastery where he'll be kept under gentle watch. No dungeons, just quiet, and the knowledge that his rebellion didn't stick. Back with William, the mood is hardening. The king is done with half measures. He begins moving with relentless energy through the countryside, targeting villages suspected of harboring rebels, cutting off supplies, and making very public examples of disobedience. And yet, as you ride north again, you pass people who still glance up from their plows with open defiance. Farmers who pretend not to understand French. Children who spit behind their hands when the army passes. The land itself seems to reject you. Boggy fields, slippery stones, roads that lead nowhere. The rebels are quiet for now, scattered and leaderless. But you can tell the hatred still simmers. The wind carries it. The crows seem to echo it in their cries. Even the rivers move with a kind of brooding resistance. William senses it too. He's not just here to punish. He's here to make rebellion impossible. But we'll get there soon enough. For now, the ground beneath your boots is frozen hard as iron, and the sky above is the color of steel. You trudge forward, wondering if you'll ever be warm again. The order comes down with the weight of finality. Burn it all. William doesn't shout it. He doesn't have to. His gaze sweeps across the frost-laced hills of Yorkshire, and you can see it in his eyes, something colder than winter, something sharper than any sword in the armory. This isn't war anymore. This is message sending, and the message is, never defy the king. You're part of the advance column, moving out from York into the surrounding countryside. You've done marches before long, muddy, exhausting ones. But this is different. You're not looking for an enemy. You're not hunting down rebels. You're here to make sure that even if they come back, they'll find nothing to return to. They call it the harrying of the North, though no one uses the phrase yet. It's just what's happening. Village by village, field by field, a systematic sweep of destruction. Granaries are emptied, then torched. Homes are stripped of valuables, then set alight. Livestock is slaughtered or driven off. If it moves, it's taken. If it doesn't, it burns. You walk through a hamlet at dawn, just 6 cottages and a stone chapel. The air is so cold your nose goes numb. You pass a woman holding a child, her face unreadable, and a man kneeling beside a pigsty, not moving. You don't know if he's praying or if he just couldn't get up. The soldiers fan out, and within an hour, everything here is ash and smoke. The people are left alive this time, but with nothing, not even kindling. Historians still argue how much of the harrying was intentional scorched earth policy and how much was just the inevitable result of trying to break a region's will. Some sources paint William as coldly methodical. Others describe moments of restraint, even reluctance. But here on the ground, walking past what used to be someone's dinner stew bubbling over a now shattered hearthstone, the difference feels irrelevant. And the cold. Oh, the cold. This isn't a sharp, bracing kind of winter, it's the slow kind, the kind that creeps up through the soles of your boots and nests behind your ribs. Fires roar behind you, but you're still freezing. The snow falls light but steady. Smoke and flakes drift together in the air, like ash has learned to dance. Your quirky tidbit. Some Norman troops began naming their torches like pets. This one's Bernard, a soldier tells you, lighting his bundle of pitch and straw. Bernard's a hungry boy. It's gallows humor. No one's really laughing. One night, you shelter in a ruined priory. The monks are gone, either fled or buried in the frozen fields. The stone walls echo your every movement. Someone finds a wine cellar, and for a brief few hours, there's warmth and candlelight. A scribe reads from a psalter in a cracked voice. You lie on straw, staring at the vaulted ceiling, wondering what sins you're committing by just following orders. The next morning, the snow is pink around the stables. You don't ask why. You continue westward. More villages. More silence. Sometimes you see people fleeing ahead of youthen figures, vanishing into the woods, carrying bundles or leading scrawny cows. Sometimes they just stay, faces blank, watching their world fall apart one spark at a time. William rides near the front. He's not smiling, not raging, just moving. Focused. Distant. You wonder if he's thinking of Normandy, of how many rebellions he crushed there, of how much it took to bring order to a wild land. Maybe he thinks the North will bend the same way. Or maybe he knows better, and this is just the cost he's willing to pay. One afternoon you pass a monastery that resisted. A few monks tried to hide rebels in their cellars. William ordered it razed. The scriptorium still smells of ink and candle wax, even as the roof collapses. A half-finished manuscript flutters in the breeze, something about St. Cuthbert. A name that once meant something here. Now, it's just ash. That night, a soldier beside you says he saw a figure standing in the field, far off, holding a staff. A ghost, he whispers, watching. You don't reply. You're not sure you disagree. Historians estimate that tens of thousands died in the aftermath not by sword, but by cold, hunger, disease. Entire swaths of northern England were left barren, uninhabitable for years. Crops never sown, livestock never restocked. You're walking through the creation of a wasteland, one torch at a time. You try not to think about it too much. You try to focus on your boots, on your rations, on how many days until you're back in York. But when you lie down in your tent that night, the smell of smoke is still on your cloak. And it stays there. It always stays. You wake up stiff, cold, and slightly tangled in your own blanket. The world outside your tent is silent in a way that makes you pause not the calm of peace, but the hush of snowfall over emptiness. No bird song, no human chatter, just the gentle whisper of wind brushing over the land like a shroud. You step out and see what's left of the village you passed through yesterday. Or rather, what isn't left. The houses are blackened shells, their timbers collapsed inward like weary shoulders. The stone walls still stand, but just barely. The snow covers the wreckage in soft drifts, giving everything a deceptively peaceful look, like someone tried to tidy up the apocalypse. Ahead lies a frozen river. The Derwent, they say. You don't care what it's called, just that it's frozen solid enough to hold the weight of a man on horseback. William's army crosses it cautiously, riders spaced out to avoid collapse. The ice groans under the pressure, and every creak makes your gut clench. But somehow, you make it across. On the far bank, a dog watches you from the tree line. Just sits there, steam rising from its breath, unmoving. No collar, no master. Like everything else here, it seems orphaned by war. You move on. The wind picks up. The soldiers start coughing more. Some have begun wrapping cloth around their mouths, not just for warmth, but to filter the ash that still lingers in the air from weeks of torching. It's in your hair, your cloak, your skin. No matter how many rivers you cross, you carry the soot with you. In one particularly hard-hit village, if you can call it that anymore, you find a church still partially standing. Inside, there's a mural on the wall, half burned away. It shows a group of saints smiling benevolently down at a congregation. You try not to think about the fact that their painted faces are less haunted than yours. The fields beyond are dead. Nothing grows. Nothing will. For a while, the army doesn't bother salting the earth. But it may as well have. You pass furrows where crops once grew rye, barley, oats. Now they're just frozen trenches holding skeletal remains of last summer's harvest. A few bones, too. Not all livestock. Historians still argue whether the famine that followed the harrying was an unintended consequence or part of the plan. Some think William simply wanted the rebellion crushed and went too far. Others believe it was designed to starve the North into submission of food. No resistance. Either way, the effect is the same. You're walking through a ghost country. In one village more like a pile of sticks and sorrow, you find 3 survivors. An old man, a child, and a woman who refuses to speak. William's commanders don't order them killed. That would be unnecessary. They have nothing. No food, no roof, no weapons. You give them a scrap of hard biscuit. The child doesn't even blink before eating it like it's a feast. You wonder if kindness like that will come back to haunt you in someone's future chronicle. Your quirky tidbit. Local legends claim that after the harrying, some villagers began burying spite coins. Small, crude tokens inscribed with angry messages to the king. Not meant to be found, just meant to exist. Like curses scratched into history by those too weak to fight back. You find one near a burnt-out granary, a tiny lead disc etched with what might be a face, or maybe a crude drawing of a pig wearing a crown. Hard to say. You and the others sleep in the ruins of an old manor that night. The snow comes heavier now, and someone jokes that the stars are hiding because even they can't bear to look down at what you've done. No one laughs. Not even Bernard, who usually finds a joke in everything, even the soup. William doesn't stop, doesn't slow. He pushes deeper into the Pennines. If there's a rebel hiding in a root cellar or under a sheep carcass, the king wants them flushed out. He's chasing ghosts now. Hatred made real. It's not about Edgar anymore. It's about control, permanence. But you can feel something shifting. The army is quieter these days. Fewer conversations, more staring into the fire, fewer jokes, even among the officers. The weight of what you're doing has settled over everyone like another layer of frost. Sometimes at night, you think you hear voices out in the trees. Sometimes they sound like people. Sometimes, like wolves. You keep your sword close, and you dream of summer, even if you're not sure England will ever see one again. You've had your fill of burning things for a while, so when the next assignment comes, you feel oddly grateful. Escort duty to a monastery, not to torch it, for once but to check for rebels hiding in the crypts, and to question the monks. It's still technically part of the harrying effort, but compared to torching frozen sheep pens and finding arrowheads lodged in your boot, it feels downright civilized. The monastery sits tucked into a wooded valley, surrounded by thin trees and brittle hedges. It's small, stone-built, with a roof patched in places with hides to keep out the snow. Smoke curls from its chimneys. As you approach, the bell rings not in alarm, but in welcome. Or maybe warning. Hard to tell with monks. Inside, it's warmer than expected. Not warm exactly, but the kind of damp chill that at least doesn't bite. The air smells of beeswax, musty robes, and something sweet that might be old apples. The monks greet you with bowed heads and folded hands. They say they have no rebels. You smile politely and start looking anyway. You wander through the scriptorium, where a few brothers are copying manuscripts by dim candlelight. One's working on a history of Saint Aidan, another on Psalms. A third is writing something in Latin that looks suspiciously like a shopping list. You nod approvingly. Historical productivity is good for morale. One monk offers you a seat and something hot to drink than barley tea, but after weeks of army rations, it might as well be champagne. As you sip, you notice a squirrel sitting quite calmly on the monk's shoulder. You raise an eyebrow. "Oh, that's Athelbert," the monk says. "He likes dried figs." And just like that, your faith in humanity is restored for a brief, bizarre moment. It turns out that many monasteries in the north, despite their vows of neutrality, had been quietly harboring rebels over the past few months. Not necessarily out of politics, often out of mercy. Injured men hidden behind wine barrels. Messages passed through traveling friars. A stolen sword tucked behind a tapestry of the Virgin Mary. You find no one hiding here, but you sense the loyalty these monks have for their neighbors. They might not raise arms, but they remember who burned their village last spring. They remember the names of children who vanished into the snow. You get the feeling that if Edgar Atheling showed up tonight, he'd be given a hot meal and a bed, and maybe even a pet squirrel for comfort. Historians still debate how much of a role monasteries played in preserving northern resistance. Some argue they were active safe havens, part of an underground support network. Others see them as passive shelters less about rebellion, more about simple humanity. Either way, you start to understand why William doesn't trust them. That evening, you stay in the monastery guest quarters. The walls are stone, the beds are straw, and the roof doesn't leak, which already makes it the best night's sleep you've had in a month. You hear chanting in the distance, Compline, maybe, and the soft shuffle of robes on flagstones. There's peace here. Real, aching peace. You share a meal in the refectory. It's lentils, root vegetables, and an alarming amount of boiled leeks. But it's hot, and no one's yelling. For dessert, a thin slice of honeyed oat cake. One monk tells you it's a recipe passed down from Lindisfarne, before the last Viking showed up and ruined everyone's Tuesday. Your quirky tidbit. Northern monks were known to name not just their pets, but also their favorite books. One proudly shows you his worn copy of the Rule of Saint Benedict. "This is Gertrude," he says. "She's temperamental but wise." You don't argue. As you sit beneath the flickering torchlight, you realize something strange. No one here sees you as a conqueror, just a tired man with holes in his boots. They offer you wine made from parsnips. You drink it, immediately regret it, but nod appreciatively. You're polite, after all. When you leave the next morning, snow crunches beneath your feet. The squirrel waves goodbye. You think about asking to stay, just for a week, maybe 2. But the army moves, and you move with it. Outside, the wind is harsher again. The destruction continues. But for a moment, you remember that not every story here is one of fire and steel. Some are quiet, warm, carried by chanting voices and warm oatcakes, and monks who treat squirrels like nobility. You'll miss this place. You've left the monastery behind, know its warmth, its peculiar squirrel diplomacy, its barely edible lentil sand. Find yourself trudging into a different kind of quiet. The ruins stretch for miles in every direction. The land looks like it forgot how to be alive. But amid the scorched fields and skeletal villages, something else starts to appear. Lists. Names. Numbers. William has shifted tactics. The fires haven't stopped. Not entirely, but now he wants to know exactly what he controls and, more importantly, what he can tax. This is the beginning of what will eventually become the Domesday Book. You don't know that yet, of course. To you, it's just another cold task in a colder landscape, riding from village to village, estate to estate, taking notes on things no one really wants to talk about. How many oxen were lost last winter, how many pigs survived the frost, how many households are still standing, and how many are now just bones. You're accompanying a clerk today, a thin man named Hugo, who carries 3 ink pots, 2 quills, and an air of smug efficiency. He rattles off questions like a one-man inquisition. Who owned this before the conquest? How many acres are tilled? Are these sheep or extremely hairy dogs? In most places, people don't answer. They just stare, or lie, or quietly vanish into the woods. Still, the records are written down, carefully, deliberately. It's not just about taxes. It's about proving ownership, redistributing land, establishing who gets to claim what under this new Norman regime. William wants order, even if he has to dig it out of the ashes. Historians still argue whether these early surveys were part of a long-planned administrative vision or a desperate attempt to stabilize a crumbling conquest. Some say the Domesday Book was the inevitable result of Norman bureaucracy. Others say it was an act of control dressed up as policy. You just know it's a lot of walking, a lot of quill snapping, and a lot of pretending you know how to spell manorial holdings. 1. You stop at a manor that somehow survived the worst of the harrying. The owner, a nervous Saxon reeve named Aldred, greets you with the cautious optimism of someone who once tried to rebel but lost the paperwork. He gives you a tour of the grounds, which includes 3 muddy fields, 1 limping goat, and a cow with an attitude problem. Hugo dutifully writes it all down. 1 cow, possibly angry. Aldred sighs. She just misses her calf. You nod. Everyone here's missing something. In the barn, you find a stack of tools. Most are rusted. Some are clearly repurposed weapons. Aldred notices you noticing. It's easier to plow when the land isn't full of bones, he says quietly. You don't ask for clarification. Later, you share a meal with Hugo under the open sky, bread that could double as masonry, and cheese that may be part fossil. As you eat, Hugo reads back the day's tally in a sing-song voice, as if reciting poetry. 5 hides of land, 3 plows, 1 donkey named Oswin, possibly dead. Further inspection required. Your quirky tidbit. In some of these early records, the scribes included doodles in the margins faces, birds, even the occasional dragon. One clerk in Lincolnshire apparently annotated livestock counts with tiny sheep wearing crowns. Perhaps it was a coping mechanism, or perhaps medieval tax collectors just had excellent senses of humor. You sleep that night under the stars, using your saddlebag as a pillow and your cloak as a very ineffective blanket. The frost settles lightly on your boots. Somewhere in the trees an owl hoots and then goes quiet. Even the birds are learning not to speak too loudly. In the morning, you head west again, toward more ruins, more farms, more names on a page. The work continues. Slowly, precisely, page by page, England is being redefined. But something nags at you. A feeling you can't shake. That you're documenting not a kingdom's rise, but its ghosts. That these numbers, these lists, no matter how neat, can't really capture what was lost. Still, Ugo dips his quill again. Let's see, he mutters. 3 villagers. 1 ox. A suspiciously well-fed cat. You sigh. England, it seems, will be ruled by ink as much as by sword. The ink-stained numbers are behind you now. No more scribes for a while. No more ox-counting or muttering about sheep that may or may not be noble. You've been reassigned again back on patrol duty, trudging along half-frozen paths that wind between hollow villages and the remnants of rebel encampments. You're north of York again, deeper into the wilds, where the hills roll like waves frozen in time and the wind never stops whispering your name. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest. You ride with a small band of Norman knights, mostly quiet types. A couple of them wear mismatched armor pieces from previous campaigns, and one insists on singing old Norman marching songs that sound suspiciously like drinking chants. The rhythm helps, at least. Your boots are soaked through by noon every day, so you may as well hum while you squish. Along the way, you hear stories, strange ones. Not rebellions exactly, but resistance in miniature. A noblewoman in a crumbling manor who refuses to acknowledge William's rule. A woodsman who leads travelers in circles so they never find the main roads. A band of teenagers reportedly living in a cave, claiming to be the true court of Edgar Atheling. You suspect they mostly just eat berries and argue about who gets to wear the crown. Today, your path takes you along an ancient Roman road, half overgrown and cracked like the skin of an old horse. The land on either side is quiet. Too quiet. You pass a village with no smoke rising from chimneys. All the doors hang open. A single chicken stares at you like it's the new mayor. Even the wolves seem bored. You make camp near a stream that night, beside the ruins of what was probably a mill. The wheel lies broken, half submerged in the icy water. Someone's carved a rude image of William on one of the nearby stones. It's not flattering, but the nose is impressively accurate. Your quirky tidbit. In remote parts of the north, wolves were not just feared, they were respected. Some villagers left offerings for them at the edge of forests, scraps of meat, prayer beads, even shiny stones. Not worship exactly, more like a truce. Take the sheep, leave the children, kind of arrangement. During patrol, you're tasked with checking out one such village, a place called Linton, where no taxes have been collected in months and no messengers have returned. It's nestled in a valley of damp fog and grumpy sheep. You and 3 others descend just as dusk settles in. The village is odd. Not destroyed. Not empty, just quiet in a way that makes your bones twitch. People are here, watching you from windows, but no one speaks. A woman sweeps her doorstep with mechanical focus. A child carves something into a stick with a very serious face. An old man sits by the well, not drawing water, just sitting. You announce yourselves. No one responds. You check the longhouse and find preserved vegetables stacked neatly, untouched. The bread in one hearth is still warm. It's like the village is waiting for something or someone to give them permission to move again. One of your companions jokes that this place is cursed. Another points out that even ghosts pay taxes more reliably than Linton. You laugh, but you all tighten your sword belts just a bit more. Historians still argue whether isolated villages like these were pockets of passive resistance or just overwhelmed, abandoned communities trying to survive unnoticed. You're inclined to believe both. You've seen how people survive when no one leaves them a choice. Linton feels like it's holding its breath. You leave the next morning with no violence, no answers, and a stronger sense that William may never truly control places like this. Not with swords, not with scribes, not with even the sternest tax policies. You head west again, toward a noble estate that reportedly swore fealty last season only to accidentally forget the terms this season. Along the way, your group is briefly delayed by a herd of particularly stubborn sheep. They refuse to move. A knight waves his sword. The sheep yawn. So now you're herding livestock with the tip of your boot, wondering whether this is what victory looks like. That night, you share stories around the fire. One soldier talks about his wife in Normandy and how she thinks England is too damp to be real. Another brags about once wrestling a deer. You suspect the deer won. You stare up at the sky, where the stars flicker like gossiping monks. Somewhere out there, someone probably still dreams of rebellion. Maybe Edgar. Maybe not. Maybe a farmhand who remembers a time when kings didn't send tax agents and torch squads. But for now, it's just you, your soggy boots, and the howling of a distant wolf who, you swear, just burped. By now, you've developed a theory. The North isn't rebellious. It's just perpetually unimpressed. You ride into another settlement, this one technically under Norman control, and are greeted with the same look you've seen in dozens of places since Hastings. The slow, tired blink of someone who has lived through too many lords, too many taxes, too many promises. They look at your sword, your seal, your polished helmet hand, then go back to stirring their cabbage. You speak to a village elder about the latest laws from William. She nods politely, offers you turnip soup and says, "We've heard worse." You're fairly certain she's not trying to be rude, just honest. Everywhere you go, you see the same signs. Rebuilt homes with scorched rafters still visible. New Norman watchtowers looming awkwardly beside ancient Saxon churches. People wearing expressions that say, "Fine. You're in charge. For now." It's not active rebellion anymore, not really. The fires have died down. The rebels are scattered, hiding, gone. But the silence is its own kind of resistance. No warm welcomes. No friendly chatter. Just grudging compliance and the occasional peasant who, accidentally, forgets to bow. In one town, if you can call it that, being mostly 3 houses and a goat, someone's hung a painted sign over the well. It reads, "Water's free, but not for kings." You laugh. No one else does. Historians still argue whether William ever truly conquered the North. On paper, yes. By force, absolutely. The castles stand. The taxes flow. The records are kept in ink and bound in fine parchment. But in spirit, that's murkier. The North remembers its own stories. The kings it chose. The lords it tolerated. The invaders it outlived. And William, no matter how many castles he builds, feels like a man trying to write his name into a river. The ink just drifts away. You're stationed near Durham now, where another stone castle is underway. This one's bigger than most. Its foundations are deeper, and the walls are meant to last. William's message is clear. He's not going anywhere. The laborers, mostly conscripted locals, work silently, stone by stone. You speak to a young mason named Leofric. He's missing 2 fingers and has a gaze like he's seen too many winters. You ask if he minds building a fortress for the people who burned his brother's farm. He shrugs. The stones don't care who lays them. There's a kind of genius in that logic. Your quirky tidbit. During construction, one Norman engineer tried to decorate the corner of a tower with carved lions. Local stonemasons misheard the request and instead carved 2 sheep with what appear to be battle axes. No one corrected it. They're still there, moss-covered, heroic, and vaguely disapproving. You wander the growing fortress, inspecting supplies, pacing between timber scaffolding and walls slick with frost. The castle is taking shape, but the village around it doesn't seem to care. The children still throw rocks at each other with medieval enthusiasm. The farmers still grumble about the weather. The goats still behave like minor deities. You overhear a visiting Norman noble complaining to a priest. "These people have no gratitude," he mutters. "We've brought them order." The priest, an Englishman in Norman robe, simply smiles and says, "They had order. You brought paperwork." That night, back in your makeshift barracks, you hear rumors of yet another minor revolt. Not a real uprising, just a group of angry locals who chased off a tax collector with a hoe and a particularly aggressive chicken. You suspect that chicken is the real leader of the resistance. Sleep doesn't come easy. The wind outside is sharp again. One of the knights snores like he's trying to summon Norse gods. You shift under your blanket, thinking about how far you've come from William's coronation, through rebellion, flame, snow, and silence. And still, the North resists. Not loudly, not violently, but persistently. You dream of a feast where everyone speaks different languages and no one understands what's being celebrated. There's a roasted goose, a harpist, and a monk feeding squirrels under the table. When you wake, it's raining. Of course it is. And William? He's planning another inspection tour. The rain hasn't stopped for 2 days. It slides down your cloak, creeps into your boots, and squelches with every step like a wet secret. You've stopped trying to stay dry. At this point, you and the weather are in a cold, damp relationship of mutual resentment. Still, the work goes on. William wants something new now. Reconstruction. You're back in York again, where the city's skeleton is being slowly dressed in new stone and wood. The old Norman castles, previously burned by rebels, are being rebuilt with even thicker walls and angrier-looking towers. A fresh church foundation is being laid on top of what used to be a Saxon graveyard, which some people are calling a political metaphor. You oversee the wagons that bring in lumber and stone, which is slightly less exciting than chasing rebels, but far more relaxing. At least when a plank of oak hits your shin, it doesn't yell political slogans at you. The local workmen are cautious, quiet, and visibly unimpressed by your presence. One older carpenter offers you a crust of rye bread and mutters, "It's strange building things for the same people who tore them down." You take the bread anyway. He's not wrong. Across the city, you can hear hammers, chisels, the clang of tools on scaffolding. It sounds like recovery, but it feels like something more fragile, like someone trying to glue together a shattered plate and pretend it never broke. And then there are the scribes. The scribes are everywhere now at court, in the churches, in temporary halls built of pine and parchment. William's new obsession is narrative. It's not enough to conquer, not enough to rebuild. Now he wants the story told properly, which of course means edited thoroughly. You watch one such scribe revise a chronicle of the Battle of Hastings. Harold is now always a usurper, while William has acquired a new title, God's chosen. You raise an eyebrow. The scribe just shrugs and says, truth is what survives the winter. Historians still debate how much William manipulated the written word to cement his rule. Some say he simply commissioned what any king would. Chronicles that made him look noble, rightful, and slightly taller. Others suggest he launched one of the earliest full-scale PR campaigns in medieval Europe, replacing oral histories with official ones, commissioning abbots to tweak saint stories, and making sure bards hit the right notes. You help deliver a wagon full of ink, parchment, and wax seals to a cathedral in the process of being rebuilt. The lead priest greets you with a half-smile and an expression that says, I know you burned my cousin's barn, but let's pretend that's behind us. Inside the cathedral, beneath scaffolding and newly chiseled gargoyles, scribes are training younger boys to copy letters. You watch a child carefully draw a capital W, then cross it out and start again. Too wide, he mutters. The irony is not lost on you. Your quirky tidbit. One ambitious monk began composing a saint's life for William himself, though it was never finished. Apparently, trying to make a sanctified biography out of a man best known for torching half of England proved challenging. The draft ends mid-sentence with, and lo, the king did, and nothing more. Maybe the monk ran out of ink. Or hope. Outside, the streets are muddy but slowly returning to life. You see market stalls popping up again, selling salted fish, carved spoons, and boots made from cow stomachs. The smell is aggressive, but the resilience is undeniable. Still, the people of York haven't forgotten. You see it in the way they avoid eye contact with the Norman soldiers, in the way they speak English just a little too loudly when they know their overseers can't understand it, in the graffiti scratched into the back wall of a tavern. William eats boiled dirt. Someone even drew a little crown above the word dirt. You chuckle but keep walking. At the end of the week, you help carry a heavy stone into the foundation of a new chapel. It has a carved inscription, "Here begins peace." You look at the frost. Bitten faces around you. No one says anything. Peace is beginning, maybe. But it feels more like a pause between storms. That night, curled beneath a wet blanket in the barracks, you try to write a letter home. You get as far as, "Still alive," before the ink runs in the damp and the page wrinkles into nonsense. You toss it aside. Close your eyes. Listen to the rain. And try to forget the sound of screaming timber as castles burn. The road ahead is long and mostly made of mud. You're part of what's politely being called William's royal progress, now less a parade, more a weary trudge through territories he technically already owns but doesn't entirely trust. You've been assigned to his personal entourage, which sounds prestigious until you realize it involves carrying things, smiling at villagers who pretend not to see you, and riding behind a very flatulent royal horse named Leon. Still, it's quieter than burning villages. The king himself is older now, not old by peasant standards, but definitely slower. His armor doesn't sit quite right anymore. His once tight jawline has surrendered to gravity. But his eyes? Sharp as ever. You watch him scan each village square like he's mentally rearranging it, turning rebels into taxpayers and barns into ledger entries. You stop for a few days in Lincoln. William's keen on this place. It's loyal enough, well-positioned, and offers good food, which is rare enough to matter. The locals throw a subdued welcome feast. Boiled meat, cabbage with dreams of flavor, a surprisingly decent apple tart. But even in this loyal town, there's unease. People gather to watch the procession, but there's no cheering. Just eyes. Watching. Measuring. William notices, of course. He always does. His hand hovers near his sword more than it used to. His face barely moves. You overhear him speaking with a bishop that night. Something about how rebellion is like a weed. Pull it out by the roots, and still it grows back. The bishop nods and says something about patience and providence. William just grunts and mutters something that might have been in Norman French or might have been an insult about the bishop's shoes. You continue northward, past villages where the people still whisper the names of old Saxon lords, past ruins that used to be homes, then ashes, then nothing, past hastily built churches that still smell of wet plaster and cautious faith. One morning, you pass through a hamlet where the locals have created a festival of sorts. They offer flatbread, a carved wooden sheep, and a very unenthusiastic puppet show featuring a knight who gets bonked on the head by a turnip. You're not sure if it's satire or celebration. Either way, William nods once and accepts the sheep. Historians still puzzle over these royal tours. Were they genuine efforts to reconnect with the people, or veiled threats? Look, who's still king? Some suggest they were a blend of both. Administration through visibility, governance by glares. You're just tired. Your horse has developed a limp. Your cloak smells like wet moss. And your boots are talking one with a flap that says, "Help," every time you walk. You stop in Durham again. The rebuilt churches there gleam brighter now, thanks to stone taken from less fortunate monasteries. The new Bishop Norman, of course, offers wine and words. William says little. He listens. He takes notes. But you can tell his mind is already beyond the walls, out there in the hills where the trees still whisper names like Edgar, Osulf, and Hereward. You share quarters with an old soldier who's been with William since before the conquest. The man has a scar across one eye and a memory like a history book with opinions. Over a cup of bitter beer, he tells you, "This land doesn't want a king. It wants time. And maybe a decent meal." He's probably right. Your quirky tidbit. On royal tours, William's cooks sometimes had to improvise using local ingredients. One ill-fated dinner included roast eel stuffed with dried apples, mustard, and an experimental sauce made from something called river thistle. The king declared it interesting, which is what kings say when they don't want to cause a beheading over soup. Toward the end of the journey, you stop at a new fort being built in the West Riding. It's barely more than a fence and a prayer. But William inspects it carefully. He praises the stonework, tells the commander to make it wider. Then he pauses, looks out over the cold moors, and says quietly, "This land has teeth." You nod, though you're not sure he meant for anyone to hear. The progress winds south again, slowly. William has walked the bones of his conquest. He's seen what still lives, and what refuses to. As the army moves on, you ride beside a bard who plays a low, sleepy tune on a lyre. The notes drift over frostbitten fields and through leafless trees. You wonder who he's playing for. The king? The villagers? The ghosts? You don't ask. Some music doesn't need a reason. The road home doesn't feel like a road at all, more like a long exhale. The war horses move slower. The soldiers don't talk much. The banners hang a little limper, as if even the fabric knows this victory isn't the kind that inspires songs. You're heading south now, past places you've seen before, only changed. Scarred. Settled maybe, but not healed. William rides near the front again. His once proud bearing is still there, but now it's tempered, seasoned with aches and silences. He rarely speaks during the long hours on the move. You can hear his armor creak when he shifts in the saddle. He doesn't complain. He doesn't need to. You pass through villages that haven't been burned, haven't rebelled, haven't done much of anything at all. The kind that survive by being invisible. That grow turnips, not opinions. The kind that send a single elder to the edge of town with a small loaf of bread and a practiced bow. William accepts it. gives a nod, and keeps riding. In one such place, a child runs up to your horse with a bundle of flowers. They're wilted, mostly weeds, but bound together with rough twine. You take them without a word. The child smiles, then vanishes back into the crowd like a ghost in training. You tuck the bundle into your saddlebag. It smells faintly of thyme and smoke. Everywhere you go, you see the marks of the past years. Roofs patched with whatever wood could be found. Entire churches missing one wall. Roads still torn by siege carts. But also, oxen plowing frozen fields. Children chasing each other around piles of stone. Someone laughing in a tavern. Life insists on coming back, even when no one invited it. You stay in a keep just outside Nottingham for a few nights. There's ale, somewhat fresh bread, and a bard who tells a heavily sanitized version of the harrying of the North, involving noble dragons, winter giants, and a mysterious knight with a torch of justice. You almost choke on your bread. Later that night, you walk the keep's upper wall. The stars are clearer here. The air is cold, but not cruel. You breathe in deep, and for the first time in a long while, the smoke is gone. Historians still debate whether William's northern campaign was a tragedy, a strategy, or a war crime dressed in regal robes. Some point to the long-term impact. The North subdued, the rebellion silenced, the realm unified. Others speak only of the silence that followed the lost villages, the mass graves, the whispered curses buried under plowed earth. You've walked that silence, slept in it, carried it home in your boots, and yet, even now, in these final days of your long journey, you see signs that the land is refusing to stay quiet. In new church songs that include old Saxon harmonies, in scribes quietly including rebel names in footnotes, in the way people look at Norman fortresses, not with fear, but with irritation. The North is not defeated. It's just patient. You return to London in late spring. The city smells better than it used to. Someone finally cleaned the Thames near the docks, but it's still full of shouting, market stalls, and people trying very hard to pretend they aren't elbowing each other for turnips. William holds court in a hall that looks grand, but somehow smaller than you remembered. He sits on a carved chair that tries very hard to be a throne. He's older, grier, tired in a way even kings can't hide. But when he sees you, he gives a brief nod, the kind that says, "You did your part. Now go." And so you do. You step outside into the pale sun, the city buzzing around you, and for a moment, you're just a man again. No orders, no patrols, no fires to light. Just your boots on the cobblestones. Your thoughts are heavy and quiet, and the long, slow exhale of a kingdom still pretending it's at peace. Now, you're no longer in the mud, or the snow, or the chill of a burnt village. You're back here in bed, in the warmth of your room, with the softness of the pillow beneath your head, and the slow rhythm of your breath easing you back to center. Let the torches fade now. Let the flicker of cold memories from long ago dissolve into the quiet behind your eyelids. The roads are behind you. The rebellion's distant. The castle walls, the scribe's ink, the crunch of frost underfoot, all just faint echoes now. Feel how still everything has become. There's no need to build, to march, to rebuild again. No ledgers, no orders, just stillness, just breath. The stories come to rest, like so many boots before it, on the edges of the page. And whatever that land became, whatever kings rose and fell tonight, all of it waits outside the circle of your calm. So let the wind slow. Let your limbs grow heavy. Let your thoughts drift like snow across fields no longer burning. You're safe now. You're warm. And all those long-forgotten ghosts, they've found sleep too. You did well. You came far. And now, you can rest. Good night.